Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I applied for a job on the dark web. The next night, I woke up in Area 51. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need to get this off my chest. My name is Jake, and I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker. Last month, I found myself on the dark web out of sheer boredom. I had heard all the stories about how dangerous it could be, but I figured I'd just explore a bit. No harm, right? While browsing through the dark corners of the internet, I stumbled upon a job listing that piqued my curiosity. It was titled, "Seeking Adventurous Individuals for Classified Research." The description was vague, but it promised a hefty sum of money for just a few weeks of work. It didn't specify what the job entailed, only that it required someone with a strong mind and a willingness to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I clicked the link and filled out the application. They asked for some basic information and had a strange questionnaire that felt more like a psychological evaluation than a job application. Questions about my fears, my limits, my thoughts on reality. I thought it was all part of some elaborate prank, but I went along with it. After submitting the form, I didn't think much of it. I went about my usual routine: work, gym, and hanging out with friends. A week passed, and I had almost forgotten about the job application until I received an email with the subject line, "Congratulations, you're hired." The email contained an address and a time. No further details, just a note saying to be there by 10 p.m. the next day. Against my better judgment, my curiosity got the best of me. I decided to go. The address led me to a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place looked abandoned, but there was a faint light emanating from one of the windows. I parked my car and cautiously approached the building. As I got closer, I saw a man in a suit standing by the door. He looked out of place, like he didn't belong there. "Jake?" he asked as I approached. "Yeah, that's me," I replied, trying to mask my nervousness. "Follow me," he said curtly, and led me inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the exterior. It was immaculate, with bright lights and sleek furniture. He led me down a long hallway to a small room with a single chair and a table. On the table was a stack of papers, the non-disclosure agreement. "Sign these," he instructed, handing me a pen. I hesitated for a moment, but then signed the papers. The man took them without a word and led me to another room. This one was dark, with only a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. In the center of the room was what looked like a dentist's chair with various straps and metal restraints. "Sit," he commanded. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Sit," he repeated, more forcefully this time. I reluctantly sat down, and he began strapping me in. Panic started to set in, but it was too late. He placed a metal helmet over my head, and everything went black. I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, I was in a completely different place. The air felt different, sterile and cold. I was lying on a metal slab in what looked like a high-tech laboratory. My head was pounding, and my body felt weak. I tried to sit up, but my arms and legs were strapped down. Panic surged through me as I looked around. The room was filled with strange equipment, and there were other slabs like mine, all empty. I struggled against the restraints, but they were too tight. Just then, a door opened, and two men in lab coats walked in. They didn't acknowledge me at first. Instead, they busied themselves with the equipment. "Where am I? What is this place?" I demanded, One of the men finally looked at me. His expression was cold and detached. "You're in a secure facility. That's all you need to know." "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking. "You were selected for a special project," he replied. "You signed up for this." "I didn't sign up for this," I screamed, but he ignored me. The men started hooking me up to various machines, attaching electrodes to my head and chest. The whole situation felt surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I kept struggling, but it was no use. The last thing I remember before they activated the machines was the cold, unfeeling look in their eyes. It was the look of someone who saw me as nothing more than a test subject, not a human being. The pain was excruciating. It felt like my brain was being torn apart, my thoughts scrambled and distorted. I screamed until my throat was raw, but no one came to help. I don't know how long it lasted, but eventually, everything went black again. When I woke up, I was in a different room, still restrained. This one had a large window, and through it, I could see what looked like an alien landscape. It was then that the horrifying realization hit me. I was in Area 51. I woke up with a start, my head pounding and my vision blurry. I was still strapped to the metal slab, but now I was in a different room. This one was larger, with walls covered in monitors displaying various data and images. I could see my vital signs on one of them, fluctuating wildly. As my vision cleared, I saw a group of people in lab coats standing at the far end of the room, talking in hushed tones. One of them noticed I was awake and walked over. He was an older man with graying hair and a stern expression. "Good. You're awake," he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. We were beginning to worry. "Where am I?" I croaked, my throat dry and sore. "What are you doing to me?" "You're part of an experiment," he replied, matter-of-factly. "A very important one. You should feel honored." "Honored?" I spat, my anger flaring. "You kidnapped me. This is insane." "Calm down," he said, his tone condescending. "You signed up for this. You knew the risks." "I didn't know I'd be a fucking lab rat," I screamed, struggling against the restraints. The man just sighed and walked back to his colleagues, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Time passed slowly. I had no way of knowing how long I'd been there, but it felt like days. The pain from the initial procedure had subsided, but I was left with a constant headache and a feeling of dread that I couldn't shake. Every so often, someone would come in and adjust the machines or inject me with something. They never spoke to me, and I couldn't make out what they were saying to each other. One day or night, I had no way of telling. They wheeled in another person. It was a young woman, about my age, with long brown hair and terrified eyes. They strapped her to the slab next to mine, and I could see the fear in her face. She looked at me, and I tried to offer some comfort, but I didn't even know what to say. "They're going to hurt you," I whispered, my voice shaking. "I'm sorry." She didn't respond, just stared at me with wide, frightened eyes. The scientists, or whatever they were, began hooking her up to the machines, just as they had done to me. I could see the panic setting in, but she was too weak to fight back. They activated the machines, and her screams filled the room. I watched, in horror, as her body convulsed, her face contorted in agony. It was like watching a nightmare come to life. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was forced to watch as they tortured her, knowing that I was next. When they were done, she lay there motionless. I couldn't tell if she was dead or just unconscious. They unhooked her from the machines and wheeled her out, leaving me alone again. The silence was deafening. I lost track of time after that. They kept bringing in more people, each one subjected to the same horrifying treatment. I saw men, women, even children, all reduced to screaming, writhing husks. I couldn't understand what they were trying to achieve. What could possibly justify this level of cruelty? One night, I was awakened by a loud noise. The door to my room burst open, and a man in a black suit stormed in, flanked by armed guards. He had a menacing presence, and his eyes were cold and calculating. "Get him up," he barked, and the guards hurried to release me from the restraints. My muscles were weak, and I could barely stand, but they dragged me to my feet. "You're coming with me," the man said, his tone leaving no room for argument. They led me through a maze of hallways, each one more sterile and foreboding than the last. We passed by rooms filled with strange equipment and even stranger creatures, things that looked like they came straight out of a science fiction movie. I realized then that this place wasn't just a laboratory. It was a prison for things that shouldn't exist. We finally reached a large, heavily guarded door. The man in the suit punched in a code, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside was a massive chamber filled with even more bizarre and terrifying things. In the center was a large glass enclosure, and inside it was something that made my blood run cold. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. It had a humanoid shape, but its skin was a sickly gray, and its eyes were large and black. It moved with a strange fluid grace, and as it looked at me, I felt a wave of fear wash over me. "This is Subject Zero," the man said, his voice filled with a strange mix of pride and fear. "The culmination of our research." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's what we've been trying to create," he replied. "A perfect being, immune to disease, stronger, faster, smarter than any human. And you're going to help us perfect it." Before I could react, the guards grabbed me and started strapping me into another machine. I struggled, but I was too weak to fight back. They placed a metal band around my head, and I felt a sharp pain as it tightened. The last thing I saw, before everything went black, was the creature's eyes, staring into mine with a cold, malevolent intelligence. When I came to, I was back in my original room, but something was different. My body felt strange, heavier somehow, and there was a dull ache in my limbs. I tried to move, but my muscles felt sluggish and unresponsive. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't feel my legs. "Welcome back," a voice said, pulling me from my thoughts. It was the man in the black suit again. He was standing at the foot of my bed, a smug smile on his face. "What did you do to me?" I demanded, my voice trembling with fear and anger. "We've taken the next step," he replied, his tone infuriatingly calm. "You're going to be part of something extraordinary." "Extraordinary?" I spat. "I can't feel my legs." "That's temporary," he assured me. "Your body is adjusting to the enhancements." Enhancements? My mind raced as I tried to comprehend what he was saying. "What enhancements?" "You've been infused with elements from Subject Zero," he explained. "We're creating hybrids, beings that possess the best of both human and alien traits. You're the first successful candidate." My stomach turned as his words sank in. They had used me as a guinea pig, merging me with that creature. The thought was too much to bear, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "You'll soon start to notice the changes," he continued, ignoring my distress. "Increased strength, heightened senses, Rapid healing. You'll be a new breed of human. This is insane, I whispered, more to myself than to him. You can't do this to people. We can, and we have, he said coldly. And now, you're going to help us perfect the process. The days that followed were a blur of pain and confusion. They subjected me to a series of tests, pushing my body to its limits. They made me lift heavy weights, run on treadmills, and even endure electric shocks. Each time, I felt my body adapting, growing stronger, but it came at a terrible cost. I started to notice changes in my appearance. My skin grew paler, almost translucent, and my eyes seemed to darken. My muscles bulged unnaturally, and my reflexes became almost superhuman. But along with the physical changes came a disturbing shift in my mind. I felt less human, more detached from my emotions. It was as if the alien DNA was not just altering my body, but my very soul. One night, I was awakened by a loud noise. The alarms were blaring, and the lights were flashing red. The facility was in chaos. I heard screams and the sounds of gunfire echoing through the halls. I struggled to sit up, my body still weak from the latest round of experiments. The door to my room burst open, and a scientist rushed in. She looked terrified, her eyes wide with panic. "We have to get out of here," she screamed, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me up. "What's happening?" I asked, my mind foggy with confusion. "The creatures," she gasped. "They've escaped. They're killing everyone." My blood ran cold. Thought of those creatures roaming free, killing indiscriminately, was horrifying. I forced myself to stand, leaning heavily on the scientist for support. We stumbled out into the hallway, which was bathed in an eerie red glow from the emergency lights. As we made our way through the facility, I saw the carnage firsthand. Bodies were strewn everywhere, torn apart by the rampaging creatures. The walls were splattered with blood, and the air was filled with the smell of death. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. We turned a corner and came face to face with one of the creatures. It was larger than the others, its eyes filled with a primal rage. The scientist screamed and tried to run, but the creature was too fast. It lunged at her, its claws tearing through her flesh with sickening ease. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I was frozen in place, watching in horror as the creature ripped her apart. When it finally turned its attention to me, I knew I was next. But then something strange happened. The creature hesitated, its eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, it seemed confused, as if it recognized something in me. Then with a low growl, it turned and fled down the hallway, leaving me standing there, trembling with fear and confusion. I didn't have time to ponder what had just happened. I needed to find a way out. I stumbled through the halls, dodging the creatures and avoiding the blood-soaked bodies. Every corner I turned seemed to reveal more horror, more death. The facility was a labyrinth of nightmares, and I was trapped in its heart. Eventually, I found a service exit and stumbled out into the cold night air. I didn't stop running until I was miles away, my body aching and my mind racing. I had escaped, but I knew I could never truly be free. The things they had done to me, the things I had seen, would haunt me forever. As I collapsed by the side of the road, gasping for breath, I knew one thing for certain. I had to expose the truth. People needed to know what was happening in that facility. They needed to know about the monsters, both human and alien, that lurked in the shadows. I must have passed out by the side of that road, because when I woke up, the sun was rising. My body ached all over, a stark reminder of the experiments and the horrors I had witnessed. My mind was still foggy, but I knew I had to keep moving. Exposing what had happened was my only mission now. I stumbled into a nearby town, drawing wary looks from the few people who were out early. I must have looked like a madman, pale, disheveled, and wild-eyed. I needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere I could gather my thoughts and figure out my next steps. I found a small, dingy motel on the outskirts of the town and used the last of my cash to get a room. The clerk gave me a suspicious look, but handed over the key without a word. Inside the room, I collapsed onto the bed, my mind racing. I knew I needed to find a way to contact someone who could help, someone who would believe my story. After a restless sleep filled with nightmares of the facility and the creatures, I woke up and turned on the TV, hoping to see some news about the breakout. To my surprise, there was nothing. No reports of the massacre, no mention of the facility. It was as if it had never happened. That's when it hit me. They had covered it up. Whatever organization was behind the facility had enough power to erase any trace of it from the public eye. I was on my own. I spent the next few days laying low, trying to regain my strength and piece together a plan. I knew I couldn't just walk into a police station or news outlet and tell them my story. They'd think I was crazy. I needed proof. One night, as I was flipping through the channels, I saw a news segment about a hacker group that had exposed several high-profile cover-ups. They called themselves the Truth Seekers. If anyone could help me, it was them. I jotted down the contact info they displayed on the screen and set to work. I used the motel's ancient computer to send them an encrypted message, detailing what had happened to me and what I had seen. I didn't expect a response, but it was my only hope. A few hours later, I received a reply. It was brief and to the point. Meet us at the old factory on 5th Street, midnight. Come alone. My heart pounded as I read the message. This was it, my chance to expose the truth. I packed what little I had and set off for the factory, trying to stay out of sight. The streets were deserted, and the only sounds were my footsteps echoing off the buildings. The factory was a decrepit building, long abandoned and covered in graffiti. I crept inside, my senses on high alert. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Every sound made me jump. I made my way to the center of the factory, where I saw a group of people huddled around a makeshift command center. They looked up as I approached. "Jake?" one of them asked, a tall woman with short, spiky hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "Yeah," I replied, my voice shaky. "I'm Jake." "Follow me," she said, leading me to a small room off to the side. She gestured for me to sit, and I did, the old chair creaking under my weight. "Tell us everything," she demanded, her eyes boring into mine. I took a deep breath and began to recount my story, leaving out no details. As I spoke, their expressions shifted from skepticism to shock to grim determination. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. "We believe you," she finally said. "We've heard whispers about these kinds of experiments, but nothing concrete. Until now." "What can we do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "How can we stop them?" "We need proof," she replied. "Evidence that we can take to the public. You're the key to that. You've been inside. You've seen what they're doing. We need you to go back." The thought of returning to that hellhole made my blood run cold, but I knew she was right. If I wanted to expose the truth, I had to get concrete evidence. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'll go back." They spent the next few hours preparing me. giving me a crash course in espionage and equipping me with hidden cameras and recording devices. As midnight approached, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. This was a suicide mission, but it was my only chance to make things right. We drove back to the outskirts of the facility, under the cover of darkness. I crept through the shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. The place was heavily guarded, but I managed to slip past the patrols and make my way inside. The interior was just as I remembered, sterile, cold, and filled with a sense of impending doom. I navigated the hallways, my senses on high alert. I made my way to the central lab, where I knew they kept their records. I was almost there when I heard footsteps behind me. I ducked into a side room, my heart racing. As I peeked out, I saw the man in the black suit walking past, his eyes scanning the hallway. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. Once he was gone, I continued to the lab. The door was locked, but I managed to bypass the security system with the help of the gadgets the truth seekers had given me. Inside, I found rows of computers and filing cabinets. I began downloading everything I could find, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Just as I was about to finish, the alarm started blaring. They knew I was there. I grabbed the flash drive and bolted, my heart pounding in my ears. The hallways were a blur as I sprinted for the exit, dodging guards and praying I wouldn't be caught. I burst through the doors and into the night, the cold air a stark contrast to the sterile environment inside. The truth seekers were waiting with the car running, and I dove into the back seat as we sped away. We didn't stop until we were miles away, the facility a distant memory. As I caught my breath, I handed the flash drive to the leader. She looked at me with a mix of gratitude and determination. "This is it," she said. "This is the proof we need." As we drove into the night, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had done it. I had escaped the nightmare and lived to tell the tale. But I knew this was only the beginning. The truth was out there, and it was up to us to expose it. We arrived at the Truth Seekers' safe house, an unassuming building in a quiet neighborhood. The moment we stepped inside, the team got to work. They pored over the data I had risked my life to retrieve, their faces growing more grim with each passing minute. I sat in a corner, nursing a bottle of water and trying to calm my racing heart. The leader, the woman with spiky hair, approached me. Her face was a mask of determination. "We've got enough here to blow this thing wide open," she said. "But we need to move fast. They'll be looking for you." I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. I wasn't safe yet. None of us were. Over the next few hours, the truth seekers began compiling the evidence into a coherent report. It was a daunting task, but they worked with a fervor that bordered on desperation. I watched them work, feeling a mix of hope and fear. This was our chance to expose the truth, but it was also a race against time. As dawn broke, the leader called us all together. "We're going to release this to the public," she said, holding up the finished report. "We'll send it to every major news outlet, every whistleblower site, every social media platform. They won't be able to silence us all." Just as we were about to upload the files, the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and a sense of dread settled over us. I heard the distant sound of engines growing louder. My heart sank. "They found us," I whispered. The leader cursed under her breath. "Everyone, move. We need to get out of here now." We grabbed what we could and bolted for the back door. As we spilled out into the alley, I heard the sound of helicopters overhead. Searchlights swept the area, and I knew we had only moments before they were on us. We split up, each taking a different route. I ran through the maze of back streets, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear the shouts of the guards, the whir of the helicopters. My heart pounded in my chest as I ducked into an abandoned building, hoping to find a place to hide. Inside, the building was a labyrinth of decaying rooms and hallways. I stumbled through the darkness, my mind racing. I needed to find a way out, but every turn seemed to lead to a dead end. Just as I was about to give up hope, I heard a voice. "Jake, over here." I turned to see one of the truth seekers, a young man with a determined look on his face. He gestured for me to follow him, and I did, my legs burning with exhaustion. He led me to a hidden door at the back of the building. "This leads to an old sewer system," he said. "It's our best shot." We climbed down into the darkness, the smell of decay overwhelming. The sewers were a maze, but the truth seeker seemed to know where he was going. We waded through the filthy water, the sound of pursuit growing fainter. After what felt like hours, we emerged into the open air. We were outside the city, in a remote area. The sun was rising, casting a pale light over the desolate landscape. "We made it," the truth seeker said, his voice filled with relief. "Now we need to regroup and figure out our next move." We found a payphone at a rundown gas station and made a call to the leader. She answered on the first ring. "Are you safe?" she asked, her voice tense. "Yeah, we're out," I replied. "What about the others?" "We're scattered, but we'll regroup," she said. "We still have the data. We'll release it from multiple locations. They can't stop us all." Over the next few days, we moved from place to place, always staying one step ahead of our pursuers. The truth seekers released the evidence, and it spread like wildfire. The public was shocked and horrified by the revelations. Protests erupted, and the media was in a frenzy. But with the truth out, the people behind the experiments grew desperate. They intensified their efforts to silence us, and we had to be constantly on the move. I knew I could never return to my old life. I was a marked man, hunted by a powerful organization that would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. One night, as I was lying in yet another safe house, the leader sat down beside me. "You did it, Jake," she said. "You exposed the truth. You've saved countless lives." "I don't feel like a hero," I replied, staring at the ceiling. "I just feel tired." She nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I know, but your sacrifice means something. People know the truth now, and they'll fight back." As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the people who had suffered, all the lives that had been lost. I had done what I could, but the fight was far from over. The truth was out there, and it was up to the world to decide what to do with it. In the end, I had faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale, but the shadows were always lurking, and I knew I could never truly escape them. All I could do was keep moving forward, one step at a time, and hope that someday the nightmares would end. I download app from the dark web that catches aliens. The next day, 2 men in black suits knocked on my door. "All right, so this is going to sound completely insane, but just bear with me. This all started about a week ago when I was bored out of my mind and decided to venture into the dark web. Yeah, I know, it's a stupid idea, but I was curious. I've always had a fascination with the weird and unexplained, and I'd read a few stories about finding crazy stuff on there. So, I fired up my laptop, connected to Tor, and started browsing. Most of the sites were exactly what you'd expect. Sketchy marketplaces, forums full of conspiracy theories, and some downright creepy stuff. But then, I stumbled across this one site that looked different. The homepage was minimalistic, just a black screen with a single line of text. Do you want to see the truth? Below it was a download link for an app. No name, no description, nothing. I hesitated for a second. I mean, you hear all these horror stories about malware and viruses, but curiosity got the better of me. I clicked the link and downloaded the app. It installed without a hitch, and an icon appeared on my desktop. A simple glowing green eye. Creepy as hell, right? So I launched the app. The screen went black, and then a loading bar appeared. When it finished, the screen flashed, and I was met with a live camera feed from what looked like my own neighborhood. My heart skipped a beat. I looked out the window to make sure I wasn't being paranoid, but everything seemed normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then, the feed shifted. It zoomed in on a random house down the street, and a strange heat map overlay appeared. It highlighted something in the backyard, a small bright red spot. I had no idea what I was looking at, but my curiosity was piqued. I grabbed my phone, threw on my jacket, and headed out to investigate. When I got to the house, everything was dark and silent. I hopped the fence and crept into the backyard, my heart pounding in my chest. There was nothing there, just an empty yard. But then I noticed a small patch of dirt that looked freshly disturbed. I knelt down and started digging with my hands, and that's when I found it. A small metallic object. It looked like a piece of a circuit board, but it was unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was around this point that I started to feel uneasy. The air seemed to thicken, and I swear I could hear a low hum, like the sound of distant machinery. I pocketed the object and hurried back home, feeling like I was being watched the whole way. Back at my apartment, I examined the circuit board under a lamp. It was covered in strange symbols and looked way too advanced to be some kid's science project. I snapped a few pictures and uploaded them to a tech forum, hoping someone could identify it. But before I could even refresh the page, my computer screen went black. Then lines of code started appearing, faster than I could read. My heart was racing. This was beyond any virus I'd ever seen. The code stopped, and a message appeared. You shouldn't have done that. My blood ran cold. I tried to shut the computer down, but it was completely unresponsive. I yanked the power cord out, but the screen stayed on. Then the camera light turned on. Someone was watching me. I tore the battery out of the laptop and threw it across the room. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. I felt a wave of nausea and panic. I decided to call it a night and tried to sleep, but my dreams were filled with strange, vivid images of shadowy figures and distorted faces. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy and unsettled. My laptop was still in pieces on the floor, the screen eerily black. I tried to piece together what had happened the night before, but it all felt like a bad dream. Then I remembered the circuit board. I pulled it out of my pocket and stared at it. What the hell had I gotten myself into? I decided to go about my day, trying to shake off the lingering dread. I headed to work, but I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept drifting back to the app, the circuit board, and the message on my screen. By the time I got home, I was exhausted, but things only got worse from there. Around midnight, I heard a knock on my door. It was soft, almost polite, but it sent a chill down my spine. I checked the peephole and saw two men standing there. They were dressed in black suits, and their faces were blank, emotionless. I didn't recognize them, and something about them seemed off. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. One of them spoke, his voice flat and cold. "We need to talk about what you found." I felt a surge of panic. How did they know? "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. The other man stepped forward. "We know you have the device. Hand it over, and this will all be over." My mind was racing. I tried to play dumb, but they weren't buying it. The first man pushed the door open wider and stepped inside. "We don't want to hurt you," he said, but there was no warmth in his voice, just a hollow, mechanical tone. That's when I noticed something. Their eyes were wrong. They weren't human. There was a faint, unnatural glow to them, and their pupils were vertical slits. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Get out!" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The men exchanged a glance, and for a moment I thought they might actually leave. But then the first one grabbed my arm with a grip like iron. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he hissed. I struggled, but it was like fighting a statue. The second man reached into his pocket and pulled out a syringe. "This will be easier if you don't resist," he said, stepping toward me. I was trapped, panic clawing at my throat. I did the only thing I could think of. I kicked the first man as hard as I could and broke free. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and turned to face them. "Stay back!" I screamed. They paused, their expressions unreadable. Then without a word, they turned and left. I locked the door behind them and collapsed against it, trembling. What the hell had just happened? Who were they? And why did they want the circuit board so badly? I didn't sleep at all that night. Every noise made me jump. Every shadow seemed to hide another threat. I knew I couldn't stay there. I packed a bag, grabbed the circuit board, and left town before dawn. Now, I'm on the run, trying to stay one step ahead of those men, or whatever they are. I've changed my phone, deleted all my online accounts, and I'm posting this from a burner laptop I bought in a pawn shop. I don't know how long I can keep this up, but I had to tell someone. If you're reading this, be careful. Don't go looking for the app. Don't download it. And if you see those men, run. They're not human, and they will find you. I left town in a hurry, only stopping to grab a few essentials and some cash from an ATM. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I ditched my car in a long-term parking lot and took a bus to a city a few hundred miles away. Paranoia was my constant companion, but I had no choice. I had to keep moving. I found a cheap, run-down motel on the outskirts of the town, the kind of place that didn't ask too many questions. As soon as I checked in, I blocked the windows with the thin, stained curtains and wedged a chair under the doorknob. The room smelled like mildew and desperation, but it was the best I could do on short notice. I pulled out the circuit board and stared at it under the flickering fluorescent light. What was so special about this thing that those men, or whatever they were, would come after me? I needed answers, but I had no idea where to start. The images from the night before kept replaying in my mind. The cold mechanical voices, the inhuman eyes, and that damn syringe. I decided to search online again, hoping to find any scrap of information that could help. I avoided my usual forums and dove into the dark corners of the internet. I found a few conspiracy theory sites that talked about government cover-ups and alien technology, but nothing concrete. Just when I was about to give up, I stumbled across a thread in an obscure forum. The thread was titled MK Ultra Reborn: Government Experiments with Alien Tech. It sounded like the ramblings of a paranoid lunatic, but I was desperate. I read through the posts, most of which were incoherent rants, but one message stood out. It was from a user named Watcher72, and it was disturbingly specific. The post detailed a project called Project Orion, a supposed joint effort between the government and extraterrestrial beings. The goal was to harness alien technology for human use, but something went horribly wrong. According to Watcher72, the project had been shut down, but not before some of the tech leaked out. People who stumbled across it often disappeared without a trace. My blood ran cold. This had to be related to the circuit board. I messaged Watcher72, hoping they were still active on the forum. To my surprise, they responded almost immediately. "Get rid of it," they typed. "Destroy it before it's too late," I replied, asking for more information, but the screen froze for a moment, and then the message thread was gone. Watcher72's account had been deleted. Panic set in. They were onto me. I started pacing the room, my mind racing. Destroying the circuit board seemed like the safest option, but something inside me resisted. I felt like I was on the verge of uncovering something monumental. I decided to stash the board in a safe place while I figured out my next move. I grabbed my bag and headed out into the night. The streets were empty. The only sound was the hum of distant traffic. I found an all-night diner and ordered a coffee, trying to blend in. My eyes scanned the room, wary of any suspicious figures. I needed a plan, but my thoughts were jumbled. I pulled out my phone and searched for nearby libraries. I figured I could use their computers to do some more digging. There was one about 2 miles away, so I finished my coffee and headed out. The walk was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. When I reached the library, it was eerily quiet. I found a computer in a secluded corner and logged in. I decided to go deeper into the dark web, hoping to find more information about Project Orion. I spent hours sifting through forums and hidden sites, but most of it was garbage. Then I hit PayDirt, a site claiming to have leaked documents from the project. The documents were heavily redacted, but the parts that were legible painted a horrifying picture. The government had been experimenting with alien technology for decades, trying to reverse engineer it. There were reports of strange creatures, unidentified flying objects, and gruesome experiments. One document mentioned a device that could track these entities, and the description matched the circuit board I had. I was so engrossed in the documents that I didn't notice the figure standing behind me until it was too late. A hand clamped down on my shoulder, and I spun around to see a man in a dark suit. His eyes were cold and unfeeling, and I recognized him immediately. One of the men who had come to my apartment. "Time's up," he said, his grip tightening. I tried to pull away, but he was too strong. He dragged me out of the library, and I caught a glimpse of another man waiting by the entrance. They shoved me into a black van, and everything went dark. I woke up in a small, windowless room. My head was pounding, and my wrists were bound to the chair I was sitting in. The room was dimly lit, and I could barely make out the outline of a figure standing in the corner. "We warned you," the figure said, stepping into the light. It was one of the men in black suits, He looked human, but there was something off about him, something in the way he moved, like a puppet on strings. "What do you want?" I croaked, my throat dry and raw. "The device," he replied. "You've seen too much. We need to erase your memory." Panic surged through me. "Erase my memory? What are you talking about?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out a small metallic device and pressed it against my temple. I felt a sharp pain, and then everything went white. Memories flashed before my eyes. The dark web, the circuit board, the men in black suits. I felt like I was losing myself, slipping into oblivion. But then, just as suddenly as it started, the pain stopped. The man stepped back, looking confused. "It didn't work," he muttered. I felt a surge of adrenaline. Somehow, I had resisted whatever they were trying to do. I struggled against the bindings, but they were too tight. The man in the suit turned to leave, but before he did, he said something that chilled me to the bone. "We'll be back. You can't run forever." As soon as he was gone, I focused on escaping. I managed to wiggle my wrists free and untie the rest of the bindings. I had to get out of there before they came back. I searched the room for any clues about where I was, but it was completely barren. I found a small ventilation shaft in the corner and pried it open. It was a tight squeeze, but I managed to crawl through and into a larger duct. I had no idea where I was going, but I kept moving, praying I wouldn't run into any more of those men. After what felt like hours, I found an exit and crawled out into an alleyway. I was bruised, battered, and exhausted, but I was free. For now, I knew I couldn't stop. They were still out there, and they wouldn't give up until they had the device. I needed help, but who could I trust? The authorities would think I was crazy, and I couldn't go to my friends or family. It would put them in danger. As I stumbled through the streets, I made a decision. I would find Watcher 72, the one person who seemed to know what was going on. It was my only chance. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The men in black suits, the strange device, the alien technology, it was all connected, and I was right in the middle of it. I had to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. I spent the next few days hiding in a cheap motel, barely sleeping, and jumping at every sound. Every knock on the door made my heart race, and every stranger I saw on the street looked like a potential threat. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but I had no idea what my next move should be. My mind kept going back to Watcher 72. They were the only person who seemed to know anything about Project Orion and the device I had found, but finding someone who had vanished from the internet wasn't going to be easy. I needed a plan. I decided to start with the 4, where I had first contacted Watcher 72. I logged in from the motel's grimy, outdated computer and searched for any posts they might have made before their account was deleted. It took hours of sifting through conspiracy theories and paranoid rants, but I finally found something, a thread where Watcher 72 had been quite active. They had mentioned meeting up with like-minded individuals at a place called the Hollow Bar, located in a sketchy part of the city. It wasn't much to go on, but it was my only lead. I packed up my things and headed out, keeping my head down and my eyes peeled for any sign of those men in black suits. The Hollow Bar was everything I expected, and worse. The dimly lit dive reeked of stale beer and cigarette smoke. The patrons were a mix of grizzled regulars and shady characters who looked like they had more than a few secrets of their own. I felt out of place and on edge, but I had to keep going. I approached the bar and ordered a drink, trying to look inconspicuous. As I sipped my watery beer, I scanned the room for anyone who might be connected to Watcher 72. There was a group of people huddled in a corner booth, talking in hushed tones. I decided to take a chance. I walked over, my heart pounding. "Excuse me, I'm looking for someone who goes by Watcher 72. Do you know them?" The group fell silent, their eyes narrowing in suspicion. Finally, a woman with short, dyed hair spoke up. "Who's asking?" I hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. "I'm a friend. They helped me with something, and I need to find them." The woman exchanged a glance with her companions before motioning for me to sit. "All right, but if you're lying, you're going to regret it." I nodded and took a seat. She leaned in closer, her eyes boring into mine. Watcher 72 hasn't been around for a while. They were into some deep shit, talking about government conspiracies and alien tech. Said they were being watched. Then one day, they just disappeared. My stomach churned. "Do you know where they might have gone? Any place they mentioned?" She shrugged. "They talked about a safe house outside the city. A place where they could lay low if things got too hot. I don't know where it is, but they said it was near an old abandoned factory. That's all I've got." It wasn't much, but it was something. I thanked her and left the bar, feeling more anxious than ever. I needed to find that safe house, but I had no idea where to start. The city was full of abandoned factories, and searching them all seemed impossible. As I walked through the dark streets, I noticed a car following me at a distance. My heart skipped a beat. I quickened my pace, trying to lose them, but the car sped up too. Panic set in, and I broke into a run, darting down alleys and side streets, hoping to shake them off. I could hear the car's engine roaring behind me, getting closer and closer. I turned a corner and found myself in a dead-end alley. The car stopped at the entrance, and two men got out, both dressed in black suits. My worst fear had come true. They had found me again. "Enough running," one of them said, his voice cold and emotionless. "Hand over the device." I backed away, my mind racing. There was nowhere to go. I was trapped. "I don't have it," I lied, trying to buy some time. The other man smirked. "We know you do. Don't make this harder than it has to be." They advanced on me, and I felt a surge of desperation. I couldn't let them take me again. I spotted a broken bottle on the ground and grabbed it, holding it out in front of me like a weapon. "Stay back." They hesitated for a moment, and I seized the opportunity. I lunged at the first man, slashing at his face. He recoiled, more out of surprise than pain, but it was enough. I turned and ran, scrambling over a chain-link fence and disappearing into the night. I kept running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like they were going to give out. I found myself in an industrial area, surrounded by abandoned buildings and factories. I ducked into one of them, collapsing against a wall and gasping for breath. I could still hear the men in black suits searching for me, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. I had to find the safe house, and fast. I remembered what the woman at the bar had said about it being near an old factory. I started exploring the area, looking for any sign of a hidden refuge. Hours passed, and exhaustion was starting to take its toll. Just when I was about to give up, I found it, a small, inconspicuous door hidden behind a pile of debris. I knocked, praying that someone would answer. After a few agonizing moments, the door creaked open and a face appeared. It was Watcher 72. "Who are you?" they demanded, eyeing me warily. "I need your help," I gasped, barely able to speak. The men in black suits, the device, they're after me. Their eyes widened in recognition. "Get inside quickly." I stumbled into the safe house, and Watcher 72 locked the door behind me. I was safe for now, but I knew this was only the beginning. The men in black suits wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted, and I had to uncover the truth before it was too late. Inside the safe house, the air was thick with tension. The walls were lined with maps, diagrams, and newspaper clippings, all connected by strings of red yarn. It looked like something straight out of a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Watcher 72, whose real name I learned was Alex, led me to a small kitchen area and handed me a glass of water. "You've got some explaining to do," Alex said, their eyes scanning me intently. "Start from the beginning." I told Alex everything, from finding the app on the dark web, to the men in black suits, to the strange circuit board. Alex listened without interrupting, their expression growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, they leaned back in their chair, deep in thought. "That device you found is a tracker," Alex finally said. "It was designed to detect and monitor extraterrestrial activity. The men in black suits, they're part of a covert government agency tasked with covering up alien encounters and retrieving any leaked technology." I felt a cold pit of dread in my stomach. "So what do we do? How do I get them off my back?" Alex stood up and began pacing the room. "First, we need to destroy the tracker. It's the only way to stop them from finding you. But we also need to gather evidence. If we can expose this, maybe we can put an end to their operations." I nodded, though the idea of going up against a shadowy government agency made my skin crawl. "Where do we start?" Alex handed me a burner phone. "We're going to contact a journalist I know. She's been digging into these conspiracies for years and has sources that can help us. But we need to be careful. They're always watching." We spent the next few hours preparing. Alex showed me how to use the burner phone securely and set up encrypted communications. They also gave me a crash course in counter-surveillance tactics, how to spot tails, shake off pursuers, and avoid leaving a digital footprint. It was overwhelming, but I knew my survival depended on it. Finally, we made the call. The journalist Sarah was skeptical at first, but when Alex mentioned the tracker, her tone changed. She agreed to meet us at a safe location the next day. We had to move quickly, but stealthily. That night, I barely slept. Every creak and groan of the old building made me jump. The fear of being found gnawed at me, but I knew I had to stay strong. Morning came, and we set out under the cover of dawn, taking back alleys and side streets to avoid detection. We arrived at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a perfect meeting spot, secluded, but with plenty of escape routes. Sarah was already there, waiting nervously. She was a tall woman in her late 30s, with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Alex," she greeted, nodding, "and you must be our mystery guest." I introduced myself, and we got straight to business. Alex handed Sarah the circuit board, and she examined it closely. "This is incredible," she muttered. "If this is real, it could blow the lid off everything." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. We all froze. The men in black suits had found us. They moved in quickly, weapons drawn, their faces expressionless as always. "Hand over the device," one of them ordered. You don't know what you're dealing with. Sarah clutched the circuit board to her chest. You're not taking this, she spat. The world deserves to know the truth. The lead agent's eyes flickered with something almost like amusement. The world isn't ready for the truth. Stand down, or we will use force. Before any of us could react, a deafening bang echoed through the warehouse. Smoke filled the air, and chaos erupted. Alex grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a stack of crates. We need to get out of here, now, they shouted over the din. We made a break for it, dodging through the labyrinth of crates and machinery. I could hear Sarah arguing with the agents, but I couldn't make out the words. Then another bang, and the shouting stopped. My heart sank, but we had no time to look back. We burst through a side door and into the blinding daylight. Alex led me to a car parked nearby, and we jumped in. Tires screeched as we sped away, leaving the warehouse and the chaos behind. My mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. Sarah? I asked, my voice trembling. Alex shook their head. We can't go back. If she's alive, she'll find us. We need to focus on our next move. I nodded, though guilt and fear gnawed at me. What now? Alex glanced at me, their expression grim. We go to the press. We leak everything we have. It's our only chance. We drove in silence for what felt like hours, winding our way through back roads and avoiding main highways. Finally, we arrived at a small, nondescript building. Alex parked the car and led me inside. It was another safe house, stocked with supplies and a secure internet connection. We set up our equipment and started compiling all the evidence we had. The circuit board, the documents, everything. Alex wrote up a detailed account of what had happened, and we sent it all to multiple news outlets and independent journalists. Then we waited. The response was overwhelming. Within hours, the story had gone viral. News stations were broadcasting our evidence, and social media was ablaze with speculation and outrage. People were demanding answers, and the government was scrambling to contain the situation. But we knew it wasn't over. The men in black suits wouldn't just disappear. They would be more determined than ever to silence us. We had exposed them, but now we were more vulnerable than ever. As night fell, I felt a strange sense of calm. We had done something important, something that might change the world, but I also knew that we had crossed a line and there would be no going back. Alex handed me a gun, their expression serious. Just in case, they said. We need to be ready for anything. I took the weapon, the weight of it feeling foreign and heavy in my hand. I wasn't a fighter, but I knew I had to be prepared. We were in this together, and there was no turning back. As we hunkered down in the safe house, listening to the news reports and waiting for the inevitable retaliation, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. We had started something, and now we had to see it through to the end, whatever that might be. The days following our big reveal were a blur of anxiety and paranoia. The story spread like wildfire, sparking debates, protests, and endless speculation. But with each passing hour, the threat of the men in black suits loomed larger. We knew they wouldn't sit idly by while their secrets were exposed. Alex and I fortified the safe house as best we could, barricading windows and setting up makeshift alarms. We took turns keeping watch, our nerves stretched to the breaking point. Every creak and shadow seemed like a harbinger of doom. One night, as I sat in the dimly lit kitchen, clutching the gun Alex had given me, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. I tensed, straining to hear. Alex was in the next room, monitoring the news. I crept to the doorway and called out in a whisper, "Alex, someone's here." Alex joined me, their face a mask of grim determination. "Stay calm," they said, though their voice wavered slightly. We knew this was coming. We moved quietly to our positions, Alex near the front door and me covering the back. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped. The silence was suffocating. I tightened my grip on the gun, my heart hammering in my chest. Suddenly, the front door burst open with a deafening crash. The men in black suits stormed in, their movements swift and precise. Alex fired a warning shot, but they kept advancing, unfazed. I could see the cold, mechanical determination in their eyes. These weren't ordinary men. I fired too, my shots wild and panicked. One of the agents dropped, but the others pressed on. Alex shouted for me to fall back, and I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking. The agents moved with an eerie, inhuman grace, closing in on us. "We need to get out of here," Alex shouted, firing another round. "There's a trapdoor in the floor under the table. Go!" I scrambled to the table, shoving it aside to reveal the hidden door. I yanked it open and dropped into the darkness below, Alex right behind me. We landed in a cramped, musty basement, the only light coming from the trapdoor above. I pulled Alex to their feet, and we stumbled through the darkness, searching for an exit. "They'll be right behind us," Alex panted. "We have to keep moving." We found a narrow tunnel at the back of the basement and squeezed through. It led to a series of old service corridors, long forgotten and filled with cobwebs. We ran, the sound of our pursuers echoing in the distance. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged into the open air, gasping for breath. We were in the woods, the safe house now a distant memory. The night was eerily quiet, the trees casting long shadows under the pale moonlight. "We can't stop," Alex said, their voice hoarse. "We need to find a way to disappear, for good." We pressed on, our path lit only by the moon and the occasional flicker of our flashlights. The woods were dense and labyrinthine, but we kept moving, driven by sheer desperation. After hours of trudging through the underbrush, we came across an old abandoned cabin. It wasn't much, but it would provide some shelter. We slipped inside, collapsing onto the dusty floor. For a moment, we just lay there, catching our breath. Then Alex turned to me, their expression serious. "We need to come up with a plan. We can't keep running forever." I nodded, my mind racing. "We need to take the fight to them. Find out where they operate from. Expose everything. We can't do it alone, though. We need allies." Alex looked thoughtful. "There are others out there who know about this, who have been affected. We need to find them, unite our efforts. It's the only way." Over the next few days, we reached out to the contacts Alex had built over the years. Survivors, whistleblowers, anyone who had a stake in exposing the truth. Slowly we formed a network of resistance, a ragtag group of individuals united by a common goal. We planned our next move meticulously, gathering intel and resources. Our goal was to infiltrate one of the government's secret facilities, obtain irrefutable evidence, and broadcast it to the world. It was a long shot, but it was our only hope. The night of the operation, we moved under the cover of darkness. Our target was a heavily guarded compound, rumored to be one of the main hubs for Project Orion. We split into teams, each with a specific task. Alex and I were part of the infiltration team, tasked with getting inside and accessing the mainframe. We approached the compound cautiously, using the cover of the trees to stay hidden. The guards were numerous, but we had the element of surprise. With a series of precise moves, we neutralized the outer defenses and slipped inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the run-down buildings we had been hiding in. It was sterile and cold, filled with high-tech equipment and armed personnel. We moved quickly, avoiding detection as we made our way to the central control room. When we reached it, Alex hacked into the system, downloading all the files related to Project Orion. The data was overwhelming. Detailed reports of experiments, lists of agents, and evidence of cover-ups. We had what we needed, but just as we were about to make our escape, alarms blared. We had been discovered. The guards closed in, and a fierce firefight erupted. We fought our way through, but it was clear we were outnumbered. "Go!" Alex shouted, covering me as I sprinted for the exit. I reached the rendezvous point, where the rest of our team was waiting with a getaway vehicle. But Alex was nowhere to be seen. I wanted to go back to help them, but our team leader grabbed my arm. "We have to go, now." Alex knew the risks. Tears stung my eyes as we sped away, the compound receding into the distance. We had the evidence, but the cost had been high. I clutched the drive containing the files, determined to see this through. We regrouped at a safe location and transmitted the data to every major news outlet and independent journalist we could find. The response was immediate and explosive. The media frenzy was unlike anything I had ever seen. Governments were forced to respond, and the world was finally waking up to the reality of the hidden threats among us. But even as the truth spread, I knew the fight wasn't over. The men in black suits, the hidden projects, the extraterrestrial connections. It was a vast, shadowy web, and we had only just begun to unravel it. In the aftermath, I found solace in knowing that Alex's sacrifice wasn't in vain. We had struck a blow against the conspiracy, but there was still much to be done. I stayed with the resistance, dedicating myself to the cause. We continued to fight, to expose the hidden truths and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The men in black suits still hunted us, but we was no longer alone. We had allies, we had a network, and most importantly, we had hope. The battle for the truth was far from over, but we were ready for it. I hacked into a dark web server and uncovered a government conspiracy. Hey, Reddit, I've been a lurker for years, but never thought I'd actually post something. I guess it's finally time to share my story. To protect myself, I've created this throwaway account. Even though I've taken precautions, I'm still paranoid that they're watching me. I'm not sure if anyone will believe me, but here it goes. I'm a cybersecurity specialist. I work for a small firm that contracts with different businesses to protect their data and network infrastructure. It's a boring job most of the time, but I've always had a fascination with hacking, not the Hollywood kind, but the real gritty stuff. I'd occasionally dabble in the dark web, just poking around out of curiosity. One night, I was home alone. My girlfriend had left me a few months back because she said I was too obsessed with my digital detective work. So, with nothing else to do, I decided to explore a bit deeper than usual. I've got a pretty secure setup, multiple layers of encryption, VPNs, you name it. I wasn't worried about getting caught. After hours of browsing, I stumbled upon a hidden forum with an innocuous name, something like Digital Shadows. The forum was a goldmine of obscure files and encrypted messages. Most of it was the usual garbage: pirated software, leaked celebrity nudes, conspiracy theories that didn't hold water. But then I found a thread titled Project Glasshouse. The first post was just a download link and a simple message: curiosity killed the cat. Well, I guess I'm a cat, because I couldn't resist. I downloaded the file, about 500 MB, which took forever since it was bouncing through who knows how many proxies. Inside was a collection of documents, images, and videos. The documents were heavily redacted government files. Most of the text blacked out, except for a few phrases like mind control, behavioral modification, and non-consensual. The images were worse. Grainy photos of what looked like prison cells, except they were filled with regular people. Men, women, even children. They were all restrained, hooked up to machines with wires snaking into their heads. The looks on their faces, it was pure agony. I felt a chill run down my spine, but kept going. Then I opened the videos. There were dozens, each more horrifying than the last. They showed experiments being conducted on these people. I'm not talking about simple injections or tests. This was full-blown torture disguised as science. One video showed a man strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to his skull. A voice off screen was calmly describing the procedure as the man screamed, his body convulsing violently. His eyes rolled back and foam dripped from his mouth. The voice continued, without emotion, detailing how long it took for the man to lose consciousness. I had to stop the video. My heart was pounding, and I was sweating profusely. But I couldn't stop now. I knew I was onto something huge. There was one last file, an audio recording. It sounded like a meeting between high-level officials. They were discussing the success of Project Glasshouse, how it had been going on for decades, right under the public's nose. They mentioned using prisoners, homeless people, and even those who were reported missing but never found. The most chilling part was when one of them said, "We've perfected the technology. Soon we'll be able to implement it on a larger scale. The public won't even know what hit them." I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just some crackpot conspiracy theory. This was real. And I had all the evidence. I immediately disconnected and wiped my system, but I knew it was too late. I'd seen too much. I didn't sleep that night, just sat in the dark, staring at my blank screen, replaying the horrors I'd witnessed. The next day at work, I could barely function. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go to the police. They'd never believe me. And even if they did, they might be in on it. That evening, I got a call from an unknown number. I never answer those, but this time I felt compelled. When I picked up, there was silence. On the other end, then a voice I recognized from the audio recording said, "We know what you've done. You can't hide." I hung up and threw my phone across the room. Panic set in. How did they find me so quickly? My paranoia grew. Every noise outside made me jump. I knew I had to get out of my apartment, but where would I go? I grabbed a few essentials, packed a bag, and left. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a black SUV tailing me. My heart raced as I took random turns, trying to lose them. Eventually, I managed to shake them off, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they found me again. I'm writing this from a motel room in the middle of nowhere. I don't know how long I have or what they'll do if they catch me, but I had to get this story out there. If you're reading this, please be careful. Don't go looking for Project Glasshouse. Trust me, you don't want to know the truth. I'll post more if I can, but for now, I need to keep moving. They're out there, and they're watching. I haven't slept for 3 days. Paranoia has gripped me like a vice, squeezing tighter with every passing hour. After my last post, I ditched the motel. I kept moving, staying off the grid as best as I could. Cash only, burner phones, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. I know they're after me, and my only advantage is staying unpredictable. A few nights ago, I found myself in a dingy little town that seemed forgotten by time. I rented a room in a rundown bed and breakfast, the kind of place that doesn't ask questions. The old woman who ran it didn't even look up from her knitting as she handed me the key. I barricaded myself in the room, every creak of the floorboards and whisper of the wind outside making my skin crawl. I booted up my laptop using a secure connection, knowing full well the risks, but I needed answers. I started digging through forums, looking for any mention of Project Glasshouse. It took hours, but eventually I found a thread from years ago, buried deep in a forgotten corner of the internet. It was filled with cryptic posts and dead links. One username stood out, Watcher01. I sent Watcher01 a private message, praying they were still active. To my surprise, they replied within minutes. They told me they'd been following Project Glasshouse for years, but had gone dark after receiving threats. They had proof, just like me, but didn't know what to do with it. We decided to meet in person. Risky, but I needed someone on my side. The next day, I drove to the location Watcher01 had given me. It was an abandoned factory on the outskirts of the town, the kind of place that screamed horror movie set. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, my heart pounding with every step. Inside, the factory was a maze of rusted machinery and broken windows. I found Watcher01 in what used to be an office, illuminated by the weak light of a single lantern. Watcher01 was a woman, probably in her late 40s, with a look of weariness that spoke of years spent running and hiding. She had a stack of files and a laptop open on a makeshift desk. We exchanged brief, tense introductions before she got straight to the point. She had information, and it was even worse than what I had uncovered. She showed me videos of experiments that made my stomach churn. They weren't just torturing people. They were breaking them down mentally and physically to the point where they were unrecognizable. There were documents detailing plans to expand the project globally. She had a list of high-ranking officials involved, people who held power over every aspect of our lives. Then she pulled out a photograph. It was grainy, taken from a distance, but I recognized the face immediately. It was my ex-girlfriend. According to Watcher01, she was one of their agents planted to keep an eye on me. All those late-night absences, the secretive phone calls, it all made sense now. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. She wasn't just keeping tabs on me, she was reporting my every move. Before I could process this betrayal, we heard footsteps echoing through the factory. My heart leaped into my throat. Watcher01 and I exchanged a panicked glance. We grabbed what we could and bolted, but it was too late. Men in black tactical gear swarmed the place. We were separated in the chaos. I managed to slip through a broken window and ran until my legs gave out. Now, I'm hiding in an old farmhouse miles from the factory. I've got a few supplies, but not enough to last. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves outside sends me into a panic. I can't stay here much longer. I've uploaded copies of all the files Watcher01 shared with me to a secure cloud storage. If anything happens to me, I have set it up to automatically send the link to a few trusted contacts. This information needs to get out. The world needs to know what's happening. I'm planning my next move, but options are limited. They're closing in, and I'm running out of places to hide. If I go dark, assume the worst. And please, for the love of God, don't trust anyone. They're everywhere, watching, waiting. This might be my last post for a while. I'll keep fighting, but I don't know how much longer I can stay ahead of them. If you're reading this, be careful. They're real, and they're more powerful than you can imagine. Trust no one and stay safe. I'll update if I can. Pray that I can. I managed to find a brief moment of respite in a seedy motel on the outskirts of a forgotten town. I don't even know the name of the place. The neon sign flickered intermittently, casting an eerie glow that seeped through the cracked blinds. I don't trust the room, but it's the best I could do on short notice. I feel like a rat trapped in a maze, always a few steps away from the jaws of the predator. I spent most of the night dissecting the files Watcher01 had given me, trying to piece together the scope of this nightmare. One document in particular stood out. It was a list of locations marked with red dots scattered across the map of the country. These were facilities, places where they conducted their heinous experiments. One of those dots was uncomfortably close to where I was hiding. As I stared at the map, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. You're getting too close. Leave now or face the consequences. My blood turned to ice. They knew where I was. How were they tracking me? I ditched my burner phone immediately, smashing it under my heel. Every second I stayed in one place was a second too long. I packed my things and left the motel, keeping to the shadows. I had no plan, just the primal urge to keep moving. I found an old abandoned church a few miles out of town. It was decrepit and smelled of mold, but it was a roof over my head. I made my way to the basement, figuring it was the safest place to hide for the night. The damp walls and flickering light bulb added to the sense of impending doom that had become my constant companion. I needed to know more about the people involved in Project Glasshouse. There was one name that kept popping up in the documents: Dr. Malcolm Voss. He was the mastermind behind the project, a man with a reputation for pushing ethical boundaries in the name of science. Rumor had it he was a prodigy, a genius who lost his moral compass somewhere along the way. His background was shrouded in mystery, but I managed to find a few threads to pull on. Voss had been involved in several classified projects during his career, projects that made MK Ultra look like child's play. One file contained correspondence between him and high-ranking officials discussing Phase 2 of the project. They mentioned using new technologies, including advanced neural implants and chemical mind control agents, to create the perfect soldier. These weren't just experiments. They were building an army of brainwashed, mindless drones. As I read on, a horrifying realization dawned on me. This wasn't just a local issue. They had global ambitions. They planned to expand their operations worldwide, using unsuspecting citizens as test subjects. The ultimate goal was complete control, turning free will into an illusion. I was so absorbed in the documents that I didn't hear the footsteps at first. By the time I realized someone was in the church, it was too late. The basement door creaked open, and a beam of light cut through the darkness. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. But the footsteps grew closer, echoing off the damp walls. In a desperate bid to survive, I crawled into a small crawl space under the stairs, squeezing myself into the tight space. I could hear them searching the basement, their muffled voices discussing how he couldn't have gotten far. They knew I was here. Panic surged through me, but I forced myself to stay silent, not even daring to breathe. After what felt like an eternity, they left. I stayed hidden for hours, too afraid to move. When I finally emerged, I knew I couldn't keep running blindly. I needed a plan. There was only one option left: confront Dr. Voss. He was the key to all of this. If I could expose him, maybe I could bring down the entire operation. I spent the next day gathering what little information I could about Voss's current whereabouts. It wasn't easy, but I managed to track down a lead. He had a private estate in a remote area, heavily guarded and isolated. Getting to him would be nearly impossible, but I had no choice. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I've made it to a small cabin in the woods, far off the beaten path. It's quiet here, almost too quiet. I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sends me into a frenzy of fear. I've barricaded myself in, but I know it's only a temporary solution. They'll find me eventually. Tomorrow, I'll make my move towards Voss's estate. It's a suicide mission, but I'm out of options. If I don't make it, I've set up an automatic release of all the files I've collected. The truth will come out, one way or another. If you're reading this, know that I did everything I could to stop them. This is bigger than any of us. Be vigilant. Stay safe. And whatever you do, don't trust the shadows. They're always watching, always waiting. I've been driving for hours, my nerves frayed and every muscle tensed. The journey to Dr. Voss's estate feels like a descent into madness. I chose back roads and unmarked trails, anything to avoid being spotted. The deeper I go into the wilderness, the more isolated I feel. The trees loom like silent sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky. Every so often, I catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. Paranoia is eating me alive. The estate is hidden deep within a forest, surrounded by high fences topped with barbed wire. Security cameras dot the perimeter, and armed guards patrol the grounds. It looks more like a fortress than a home. I've parked my car a mile away and have been hiking through the dense underbrush, careful to stay out of sight. The weight of what I'm about to do is crushing, but I have no other choice. As night falls, I find a vantage point overlooking the estate. I watch the guards' movements, trying to identify any patterns or weaknesses. It's risky, but I have to get inside. I wait until the darkest part of the night, when the moon is hidden behind thick clouds, before making my move. I slip through a gap in the fence, crawling on my belly to avoid the cameras. Inside the grounds, it's eerily quiet. The only sounds are my ragged breaths and the distant hum of electricity. I make my way to the main building, a massive structure that seems to pulse with a malevolent energy. The windows are dark, but I know better than to assume the place is empty. I find a side entrance and pick the lock, my hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. The interior is a stark contrast to the ominous exterior. It's cold and clinical, with white walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. It feels like I've stepped into a nightmare. I move quickly, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces. My goal is to find Voss's office, the nerve center of this entire operation. If I can access his files, I might be able to bring this whole thing down. As I navigate the labyrinthine hallways, I stumble upon a series of rooms that make my blood run cold. Each room is a cell, and inside are people. They're restrained, hooked up to machines that beep and whir with a life of their own. Their eyes are vacant, their bodies emaciated. They look like the living dead. I want to help them, to set them free, but I know I can't do it alone. I force myself to keep moving, each step heavier than the last. Finally, I find Voss's office. The door is locked, but I manage to pick it without too much trouble. Inside, the room is filled with monitors and filing cabinets. I start rifling through the files, scanning for anything that could expose Project Glasshouse. My hands are shaking so badly that I can barely read the documents. But then I find it. A master file detailing every aspect of the project, from its inception to its current status. It's all there. The names of those involved, the locations of other facilities, even plans for future expansions. As I download the files onto a USB drive, I hear footsteps approaching. My heart leaps into my throat. I hide behind a large cabinet just as the door swings open. Through a crack, I see him, Dr. Malcolm Voss. He's not what I expected. Tall, thin, with an air of cold efficiency. He moves to his desk, oblivious to my presence, and starts typing on his computer. I don't know what came over me, but I couldn't just hide and wait. I grabbed a heavy paperweight from the desk and crept up behind him. With all my strength, I brought it down on his head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. My hands were shaking as I tied him to his chair, making sure he couldn't escape. When he came to, I was ready. I demanded answers, and to my surprise, he was eager to talk. He was proud of what he'd accomplished, boasting about how they'd perfected the technology to control minds, to break wills. He said it was for the greater good, to create a society free from crime and conflict. His eyes gleamed with a fanatic's zeal. I recorded everything, every sickening detail. But then, something he said made my blood run cold. He told me they had a contingency plan, a fail-safe. If the project was ever threatened, they'd unleash a virus, a digital pathogen that would wipe out all traces of their work, and anyone who got in their way. He smirked, saying it was already in motion. I had minutes, maybe less, to stop it. In a panic, I raced to his computer and started typing furiously. I'm no hacker, but years of cybersecurity work had taught me a thing or two. I fought to access the mainframe, to override the failsafe. Time was running out, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, with a last desperate keystroke, I managed to shut it down. The room went silent, except for the sound of my ragged breathing. But my victory was short-lived. The alarm blared, and the guards were on their way. I grabbed the USB drive and fled, leaving Voss bound and gagged. I could hear the chaos erupting behind me as I sprinted through the hallways, dodging guards and praying I'd make it out alive. I burst through the front doors and ran into the night, my lungs burning and my heart pounding. Somehow, I made it back to my car and peeled out, the tires screeching on the gravel. I didn't stop driving until the sun began to rise. Now, I'm in another safe house, trying to gather my thoughts. I have the evidence, but I know they won't stop until they've silenced me. I've uploaded the files to a secure server, set to release if anything happens to me. The truth will come out, one way or another. If you're reading this, know that the fight isn't over. I'm not sure how much longer I can keep this up, but I won't stop until Project Glasshouse is exposed. Stay vigilant. Trust no one. And whatever you do, don't let them win. The days have blended into a haze of fear and exhaustion. I've barely slept, constantly on the move, never staying in one place long enough to be caught. The evidence I gathered from Voss's estate weighs heavily on me, a burden that could change everything if I managed to get it out. But the deeper I dig, the more I realize just how far their reach extends. They are everywhere. I made contact with an old friend from my cybersecurity days, someone I could trust. We met in a deserted parking garage, the air thick with tension. I handed him the USB drive, explaining everything in hurried whispers. He looked at me like I was crazy, but the fear in my eyes convinced him. He promised to spread the information to trusted sources, to get it out to the public. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak existence. With that done, I needed to disappear. I used the last of my money to buy fake documents and a beat-up car. My new identity was as flimsy as the paper it was printed on, but it was better than nothing. I drove for hours, putting as much distance between myself and any place they might look for me. The countryside stretched endlessly before me, offering a strange sense of peace. I found a small, forgotten town nestled in the hills. It wasn't on any major maps, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, perfect for laying low. I rented a room above a decrepit bar, paying cash and keeping to myself. The locals didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any answers. It felt almost normal for a while, like maybe I could finally rest, but that sense of safety was an illusion. One night, as I lay in bed, the creaking of the floorboards outside my door jolted me awake. I reached for the knife I kept under my pillow, my heart pounding. The footsteps stopped, replaced by a soft tapping, like someone drumming their fingers against the wood. I held my breath, straining to hear any other sounds. The door burst open, and a blinding light filled the room. I swung the knife wildly, but strong hands grabbed me, pinning me to the bed. I struggled, kicking and screaming, but it was no use. They were too strong, too prepared. A needle pricked my neck, and darkness swallowed me whole. When I came to, I was in a stark, white room, strapped to a metal chair. The restraints dug into my wrists and ankles, cold and unyielding. The hum of machinery filled the air, a constant reminder of the nightmare I was trapped in. A figure stepped into view, Dr. Malcolm Voss, looking smug and unbothered by the bruise on his head from our last encounter. "You've been a thorn in our side for too long," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But it ends now." I glared at him, struggling against the restraints. "You can't stop the truth from coming out. People will know what you've done." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You underestimate the power we hold. The information you gathered will never see the light of day. And you, well, you'll become just another test subject." Fear clawed at my insides, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. "I'd rather die," Voss smiled, a cold, calculating grin. "Death would be a mercy. No, you're far more valuable to us alive. We need to perfect our techniques, and you'll help us do just that." He stepped aside, revealing a row of syringes filled with various colored liquids. "These will help us explore the limits of human endurance, both physical and mental. It's for the greater good, you see." The first injection burned like fire, spreading through my veins and searing every nerve. I screamed, the pain overwhelming. Voss watched, taking notes, his expression detached and clinical. This was just another experiment to him, another step towards his twisted vision of progress. Hours, maybe days, passed in a blur of agony. They injected me with different chemicals, subjected me to electric shocks, played loops of disturbing images and sounds. They were breaking me down, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My mind began to fracture, reality slipping away like sand through my fingers. In my few lucid moments, I tried to hold on to one thought. The files were out there. My friend would have spread them by now. The world would know the truth. It was a small comfort in the midst of the torment. But then, Voss showed me a news report. The headline screamed of a massive fire at a server farm, destroying countless records. My heart sank as I realized the files, my only hope, had been lost. They had covered their tracks, and I was alone, trapped in a nightmare with no end. Now, I sit here, in this cold, sterile room, my body and mind broken. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. They've taken everything from me, my freedom, my sanity, my hope. If you ever find this message, know that I tried. I fought against the darkness, but in the end, the shadows won. Trust no one. They are everywhere, watching, waiting, and if they find you, there's no escape. Don't let them break you like they broke me. Keep fighting, keep hoping, and maybe, just maybe, you'll succeed where I failed.